The desert air was hot and heavy that evening. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky orange and red. At the far end of the military base, one man worked quietly inside a dim hangar. His name was Sergeant Alex Warren, a man who spoke little but worked harder than anyone else. Grease covered his hands and face, and the strong smell of oil and metal filled the air around him. Alex was a mechanic, the kind who never complained, never missed a shift, and never asked for help. Most of the soldiers on base barely knew anything about him. They only knew he could fix anything with blades, gears, or wires. While others laughed and joked during breaks, Alex stayed behind, focused on the Apache helicopters lined up under the hangar lights. He always treated each aircraft like it was alive. He touched every panel carefully as if he understood their language. Some of the younger soldiers whispered about him. They said he was too serious, too quiet, maybe too old for his job. No one knew much about his past, and Alex never told them. To everyone, he was just the silent mechanic who lived among machines. But a few of the older officers remembered hearing his name once before. There had been a story, something about an accident, a mission gone wrong, and a pilot who never flew again. Yet no one had the full truth, and Alex never tried to correct the rumors. He only wanted to work and keep the Apaches flying. That night, as the wind began to pick up, Alex finished replacing a damaged rotor blade. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked out at the horizon. The base was unusually quiet, except for the hum of generators and the distant sound of boots on gravel. Something in the air felt different, tense, the kind of silence that comes before trouble. Inside the command center, officers were already receiving reports. There had been unusual movement spotted beyond the border, groups of armed vehicles heading toward their area. But before they could confirm anything, the base alarms suddenly screamed through the night. Red lights flashed across the buildings, and the voice over the speakers ordered everyone to battle stations. Alex dropped his tools and ran outside. From the watchtower, smoke was already visible in the distance. A nearby fuel storage area had been hit, and flames rose high into the air. The ground shook from explosions, and the sound of gunfire echoed closer. Soldiers ran past him, shouting orders, grabbing weapons, and taking cover. In the chaos, Alex reached the hangar. The Apache helicopters stood ready, their bodies shining under the alarm lights. But one of the pilots was injured. Another was trapped near the barracks, and communications were breaking down. The base was in danger, and they needed air support immediately. Without the Apaches, they were exposed. General Raymond Cole, a tall, sharp man with years of command behind him, burst into the hangar. His face was tense, his uniform dusty. He looked around at the confused crew and shouted, "Any Apache pilots here? Anyone who can fly one right now?" For a few seconds, no one answered. The young mechanics looked at each other, frightened and unsure. The sound of distant explosions grew louder. The general's voice rose again, this time with frustration and urgency. "I said, any pilots here?" Then, from the shadows at the edge of the hangar, Alex stepped forward. His face was calm, his eyes steady. He didn't rush or speak loudly, he just stood straight and said, "Sir, I can fly." Everyone turned toward him in disbelief. The younger soldiers stared as if they hadn't heard correctly. "You?" one of them whispered. "You're a mechanic," the general frowned. "Warren, I need trained pilots, not ground crew. We don't have time for mistakes." Alex met his gaze and replied softly but firmly, "With respect, sir, I'm a former Apache pilot. Check my record. I flew missions before Kandahar." At the mention of that word, Kandahar, the general froze. He remembered that name from years ago. There had been a report about a pilot who stayed behind to protect a convoy under attack. That pilot had lost his co-pilot and barely survived when his helicopter crashed. The report had praised his bravery but said he never returned to flight duty after that. The general's eyes softened for a moment, realizing who stood before him. The same man, the quiet mechanic, had once been one of their best Apache pilots. He nodded once, quickly. "All right, Sergeant. You've got one shot. The base needs you." Without another word, Alex climbed into the cockpit. His hands moved smoothly over the controls as if they had been waiting for this moment. The familiar hum of the engine filled the air. The rotors began to spin faster and faster, cutting through the night wind. As the helicopter lifted off the ground, soldiers below watched in silence. The quiet mechanic was now a pilot once more. The bright searchlights followed the Apache as it rose above the smoke, then disappeared into the dark sky. Inside the cockpit, Alex felt his heartbeat steady. The rhythm of the rotors, the vibration under his seat, it all came back like a forgotten song. He remembered every switch, every sound, every control. The years he spent on the ground melted away in seconds. Below, the general watched as the helicopter's shadow vanished into the horizon. Around him, the base was still in chaos, but there was a new feeling in the air, a strange kind of hope. For the first time that night, the general allowed himself to breathe. He turned to his men and said quietly, "He's one of the old ones. He knows what he's doing." As the explosions continued in the distance, one thing became clear to everyone on that base. The man they had called just a mechanic was about to remind them who he truly was. That night, Sergeant Alex Warren wasn't just fixing machines anymore. He was flying into danger to defend his brothers once again. And though no one said it aloud, they all felt the same thought rising in their hearts. The base might just survive because one man refused to stay in the shadows. The desert wind carried the sound of the Apache's rotors far into the night, a reminder that some heroes don't need words, only a purpose. The sound of the Apache helicopter echoed through the dark desert sky. The rotors sliced through the hot air as Sergeant Alex Warren guided the aircraft toward the danger zone. From his seat, the ground below looked like a sea of flames and chaos. The base perimeter was under heavy attack. Enemy trucks and mounted guns were moving fast, trying to break through the defenses. Inside the cockpit, Alex's eyes stayed calm and focused. His fingers moved smoothly over the controls. Every sound, every vibration told him something about his machine. Years of flying had trained him to feel the helicopter's rhythm as if it were part of his body. He spoke softly into the radio. "Command, this is Apache 1. I have visual on the attackers." The radio crackled with static. Then the general's voice came through, heavy and tense. "Warren, we've lost contact with the East Tower. Hold the line until reinforcements arrive. You're our only air support." Alex didn't respond right away. He could already see the line of fire ahead, tracer bullets cutting across the night like red streaks. He adjusted the controls, tilted the Apache slightly, and moved in low. The sound of the rotors grew louder as he aimed the helicopter toward the advancing trucks. With one smooth motion, he released a burst from the chain gun. The rounds hit the lead vehicle, sending up a cloud of smoke and dust. From below, soldiers cheered. The silent mechanic had just become their shield in the sky. But there was no time to celebrate. More enemy vehicles were pushing forward, and communication lines were breaking again. Alex stayed low, weaving between smoke plumes and explosions. The bright flashes of gunfire reflected off his windshield. The Apache shook from the shockwaves, but he held it steady. Down at the command post, General Cole watched the radar screen. "He's flying solo against half a dozen armored units," one officer said in disbelief. The general didn't reply. He just stared at the small green dot representing Alex's helicopter. "He's not just flying," the general said quietly. "He's fighting like he's been waiting for this moment." Back in the air, Alex's thoughts drifted for a second. Memories of Kandahar flooded his mind. The last mission he flew, the crash, the loss of his co-pilot. He could still hear the man's voice in his headset, still remember the moment when the rotors stopped turning and everything went silent. That memory had kept him grounded for years. But now, in the middle of the battle, something inside him healed. He wasn't flying for medals or glory. He was flying to protect the people below, his team, his base, his family in uniform. A sudden explosion shook the Apache, snapping him back to the present. A missile had hit close by. The warning alarm screamed inside the cockpit. Alex quickly pulled up, banking hard to avoid another strike. Sweat ran down his face, but his hands didn't tremble. He fired 2 flares to confuse the enemy radar, then turned sharply toward the source of the attack. He spotted a hidden truck-mounted launcher behind a sand dune. With steady aim, he launched a rocket. It hit the target directly, lighting up the night. "Target down," he reported calmly. The general's voice came through again. "Good work, Warren. You're buying us time." Minutes felt like hours. The battle raged on. The ground troops were fighting to hold their lines, and the radio filled with voices calling for cover fire. Alex responded to each call, guiding the Apache wherever it was needed most. He moved from one side of the base to the other, taking down enemy vehicles, clearing paths for evacuation, and providing cover for trapped soldiers. The younger troops watching from below couldn't believe what they were seeing. The man they once ignored in the hangar, the quiet mechanic with oil on his hands, was now flying like a legend from the stories they'd heard in training. Some even whispered his name through their radios. "Warren's up there. He's keeping us alive." As the hours passed, the attackers began to fall back. Their vehicles were damaged, their formations broken, but Alex didn't stop. He circled one last time to make sure the area was clear. The helicopter's fuel was running low, warning lights blinking, but he stayed until the final threat disappeared beyond the hills. Finally, he turned the Apache back toward the base. The horizon was turning pale, the first light of dawn spreading across the sky. Smoke rose from the battlefield, but the base still stood. The soldiers on the ground started cheering as they saw the helicopter returning. When Alex landed, the helicopter's metal body was blackened with soot, the paint scorched by heat and shrapnel. He powered down the engine, the blades slowing until the sound faded into the morning air. The hangar doors opened and soldiers rushed toward him, their faces covered in dirt and exhaustion but glowing with relief. General Cole arrived moments later. His uniform was torn, his voice hoarse, but his eyes were steady. He walked straight up to Alex as he climbed out of the cockpit. For a second, no one spoke. Then the general saluted him, something he rarely did first. "You just saved the entire base," the general said, his tone firm but full of respect. Alex returned the salute quietly. "Just doing my duty, sir." The general nodded. "You did more than that, Sergeant. You brought them hope." Around them, soldiers were clapping, cheering, some even tearing up. The once quiet mechanic stood in the middle of it all, humble as always. He didn't smile much, but his eyes said everything, a mix of peace, pride, and relief. As the sun rose higher, lighting up the damaged base, the general turned to his officers and said, "Make sure this man's name is back on the flight roster." From that day on, things changed at the base. The younger soldiers began looking at Alex differently. They didn't just see a mechanic anymore. They saw a hero who stepped up when no one else could. He went back to his hangar just as quiet as before, but now every time he walked past, people stood a little straighter. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit near the same Apache he had flown in the battle. He'd place a hand on its side, feeling the warmth of the metal, and whisper a quiet thank you to the machine, to his fallen co-pilot, and to the chance life had given him to fly again. He never bragged about what happened. He didn't need to. The story spread on its own, told by soldiers who had seen the flames, heard the rotors, and watched a silent man rise above fear. The desert base carried many tales after that night, but none stronger than the one about the mechanic who became a pilot once more. Whenever a new recruit joined, someone would point to the sky and say, "Remember his name, Sergeant Alex Warren, the man who fixed machines and then used one to save us all." And in the stillness of the desert nights that followed, when the wind carried the distant hum of helicopters, some swore they could still hear the steady rhythm of Alex's Apache, a reminder that courage often hides behind the quietest souls. The sun rose slowly over the desert, painting the damaged base in soft gold light. The air was still filled with the smell of smoke and burnt metal. Soldiers walked through the wreckage, checking for survivors, clearing debris and helping the wounded. The night had been long and cruel, but the base had survived, and everyone knew who they had to thank for that. Sergeant Alex Warren, the quiet mechanic who had become their savior, stood beside the same Apache helicopter that had carried him into the fire. Its surface was blackened, full of scratches and bullet marks, but it still looked strong. Alex ran his hand along its body like an old friend. His uniform was torn, his face tired, but his eyes were peaceful. For the first time in years, he felt light, as if a heavy shadow had finally lifted from his shoulders. The general arrived soon after, walking with a small group of officers. When he saw Alex, he paused for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You did something last night that no one will forget," he said. Alex shook his head. "It wasn't just me, sir." The men on the ground, they held their lines. Everyone played their part. The general nodded but looked at him firmly. "Maybe, but you gave them a reason to fight when everything seemed lost." He turned to one of his officers. "Make sure his name goes back on the flight board." The officer saluted and left. Alex stood quietly, not sure how to react. It had been years since his name appeared on that board. He never thought he'd see it again. Later that day, the soldiers gathered for a small ceremony near the hangar. The base was still under repair, but they paused their work to honor the people who had saved them. Alex didn't like standing in front of crowds, but the general insisted. When he stepped forward, applause filled the air. It wasn't loud or wild, and it was steady and full of respect. Every face in that crowd showed gratitude and admiration. The general spoke a few words about bravery and duty, about how real courage isn't always loud or obvious. Then he looked at Alex and said, "Sometimes heroes don't arrive with words or medals. They arrive with quiet hands, doing their work until the moment they're needed most." Alex didn't know what to say. He just saluted, and the soldiers saluted back. It was a moment he would remember for the rest of his life. After the ceremony, life on the base slowly returned to normal. The broken buildings were repaired, the fences rebuilt, and the soldiers resumed their routines. But something had changed. The story of the battle spread beyond the camp. Other units heard about the mechanic who had saved his base by flying an Apache alone through enemy fire. His name began to travel through radio channels and military circles. Sometimes new pilots would visit the hangar just to meet him. They asked him questions about flying, about how he stayed calm under pressure. Alex never acted like a hero. He always said the same thing. It's not about being fearless. It's about doing what's right, even when you're afraid. He returned to his job as a mechanic, but everyone treated him differently now. When he walked by, people greeted him with respect. Young soldiers asked for advice. Even the general sometimes stopped to share a few quiet words with him. At night, when most of the base was asleep, Alex often sat near the same Apache. He'd lean against its side, listening to the wind. Sometimes he would think about his old co-pilot, the one he lost years ago. In the silence, he'd whisper, "We made it back, partner. We're still flying." One evening, as he was checking the helicopter's systems, a young pilot named Lieutenant Harris approached him. "Sir," the young man said nervously, "I've been assigned to the Apache unit. They say you're the best there ever was. I was hoping you could teach me." Alex smiled faintly. "The first lesson," he said, tightening a loose bolt, "is that machines don't fly themselves. It's the person behind the controls who makes the difference. Treat her like a teammate, not a tool." From that night onward, Harris came to the hangar often. Alex showed him how to listen to the helicopter's sounds, how to read the sky, how to trust his instincts. Slowly, the young pilot learned, not just about flying, but about discipline, patience, and humility. One morning, the general called Alex into his office. On the desk lay a letter marked with the official Army seal. "Command wants to give you a medal for bravery," the general said. "They're calling it the Desert Defense Citation. It's a big honor." Alex looked down at the letter for a long moment. "With respect, sir," he said softly, "I don't need a medal. I already got what I lost." The general raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Alex smiled slightly. "The sky." The general didn't argue. He just nodded and said quietly, "Then we'll hang the medal on the Apache instead. It's part of your story now." Months passed, and the base became peaceful again. The soldiers who had once been new recruits now carried confidence in their eyes. The Apache helicopters stood ready under the sun, shining with new paint. But the old one, Alex's Apache, remained in the hangar, a symbol of what happened that night. The soldiers called it Guardian 1. Whenever a new group of soldiers arrived, someone always pointed to that helicopter and said, "That's the one he flew, the night the base almost fell." Years later, after Alex finally retired, he left the base quietly, the same way he had lived, without fanfare, without speeches. The soldiers lined up to salute him as he walked out through the gates with his duffel bag. He turned once to look back at the hangar and smiled. He didn't need awards or attention. He had peace in his heart and memories that no one could take away. He had done his duty. Every now and then, the general, now older and slower, would visit the hangar. He'd place a hand on the Apache's side and think about the quiet man who once saved them all. "The best kind of hero," he would say softly, "is the one who never asks to be called one." And on some quiet nights, when the desert wind was gentle and the stars glowed bright, the soldiers still swore they could hear the faint hum of rotor blades in the distance, like an echo from that long night. It reminded them that bravery doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply walks forward when everyone else stands still. The story of Sergeant Alex Warren became a legend told again and again, not just in that desert base, but in every place where soldiers worked hard in silence, fixing, building, and waiting for their moment to serve. It became a reminder that true strength doesn't come from noise or pride. It comes from heart, And somewhere far away, maybe in another quiet hangar, the spirit of that silent mechanic still lived on, in every pilot who took to the sky believing that one person, with courage and calm hands, could make all the difference in the world.